mind that we've generated, nurturing it, caring for it in the same way that with a young seedling you kind of, put it under a cloche and you allow it to become strong. And then the next 3 chapters, 7, 8, 9, are about enhancing that, growing it, making it strong, making it flourish. And chapter 9 covers the perfection of wisdom. And so there are a number of things to say. First, that it's a long and very involved text with many complex arguments. And you ain't getting that from me, sorry. What it is very good at is giving, like the rest of the text, giving things to kind of go away and think about. Your 4 lines to meditate on. There are lots of useful things in here. So I'll try and give an indication, but for those of you who are following the FPMT course, then Gyaltsab Rinpoche's text commentary is the one you should be looking at. And for those who aren't, there's a book called The Way of Awakening by Geshe Topton, who and it's his teachings in Italy now, many years ago, but there's a very nice section on the wisdom part there. So it's renowned as being a tough text. So don't worry if things don't come quickly to you. And also to be a little bit rude about this. This is where the translation in what the text that we're using becomes quite opaque sometimes, and you think actually with a bit more trial and effort we could make something slightly clearer. It tries to follow the Tibetan very strongly, which on one sense is good, but the other sense is that the text was actually taught in Sanskrit. And it's a translation into Tibetan, and we need to pay attention to the fact that Tibetan and Sanskrit are different languages, and they structure differently, and they express things differently. So sometimes, by the time it's been taken into Tibetan and then into English from that, it just becomes unnecessarily complex.
So just be clear, did you say it's Gyaltsab J's commentary?
Gyaltsab J, yes. I've sent it with everything else I've sent to you. It's split into 2 halves, so that was like chapters 1 to 6 was one thing, and then the rest of it. It's big, but it's a very Gyaltsab J, as you know, was the first Gyaltsab after Tsongkhapa, so he was the first regent, if you like. Gyaltsab means regent, and he was the throne holder after Tsongkhapa for the Gelug, and he wrote 4 commentaries, which are considered very, very good expressions of Tsongkhapa's ideas on various things, but they're all very large commentaries. So I was really surprised to see that Fedor in Munich had translated this commentary, because it's huge work. I mean, full marks for him just for being brave to start off with the text, but Fedor's a good translator. But it's real work, and it just opens up a whole new layer with the text and the way it engages. Because one of the things about translations, when you take a translation away from its commentarial tradition, you can start quite quickly to lose the essence in a verse, or the essence of the argument. And there's this thing in the 84,000 being translated, which is a translation thing for the whole Kanjur and Tenjur. And they asked His Holiness, I heard they asked His Holiness, that they said, we're doing this, and he said, fantastic. And they said, what should we start with? And he said, the Tenjur. And they're like, oh, what about the Kanjur? And he said, no, because most of those Kanjur texts have commentaries. So if you translate the text with the commentary, then it will help you understand, but because we are who we are, they've gone for the easier part, in inverted commas, by starting with the Prajnaparamita section of the Kanjur. But if if you translate, there are a number of translations that are floating around in the West, and they're nice, but they don't have, you know, the sub-commentary and the commentary with it. This, for instance, this text has what's called a ticker and an annotator. So a ticker is a kind of very detailed commentary, almost word by word, translated from Sanskrit. So there's a lot of grammatical terminology showing how the various parts of the verses fit together. And then the annotator is even more detailed. But the difficulty is, in order to really understand that, you have to know your Sanskrit grammar as well as your Tibetan grammar, obviously, to get in there. So neither of those have been translated, but when they are translated, then we'll have to go and retranslate this, because it will shine a completely different light on it. And that was the point of those texts, was to make sure that the text didn't stray off, you know, after a while. Any case, chapter 9, wisdom. Shantideva is known for being a Madhyamaka, so he's a follower of Nagarjuna, follower of Aryadev, and following on from Chandrakirti. And he's a prasangika. In other words, of the Madhyamakas, he follows a number of, he doesn't put any essence anywhere in what we do. He gives an awful lot of power to the mind and imputation for organizing our experience. And we'll see various bits. In this, you also need to be aware, in this text, this is the chapter where Tsongkhapa and the Gelug are very different to the rest of the Tibetan tradition. The classic questioning of the Gelug way is Mipham Rinpoche in the 19th century he was writing textbooks for the Nyingma, because up until that point the Nyingma study schools tended to use the Gelug textbooks. And he was saying, no, we have our own view and our own take on some of these things, so we need to write our own books. And this wisdom chapter is one of them. And there's one particular thing that I will bring out, probably out of sequence today, just so that you're aware of where we differ, if you like. Again, all of these are fingers pointing at the moon, you know. We have a different take. It doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It means there's a different presentation, and we need to use the clash of presentations to think about these things, not to swallow things hook, line, and sinker. What's that phrase we use? Like a dog with a piece of gristle, isn't it? That's the phrase when you don't just, you know, or a Labrador. Give anything to a Labrador that really doesn't even touch the tongue. It's just, okay, so if someone would like to read the first 7 verses 1 to 7, please. That would be useful. Any of us? Go on. Thank you.
The Muni taught all these branches for the purpose of wisdom. Therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. The concealer, the conventional, and the ultimate are asserted to be the two truths. The ultimate is not an object of utilization of the mind. The mind is said to be a concealer. With respect to them, the people are seen to be of 2 types, yogis and ordinary folks. Among them, the ordinary people are damaged by the people who are yogis. Even yogis, due to differences of their minds, are damaged by the successively higher ones, because emptiness is established by means of analogies that both assert. And, for the sake of a result, one engages without analysis. People see entities and conceive them to be real, not like illusions. Therefore here, yogis and people debate. Although forms and so forth are established by a direct perceiver, it is so by renown, not by a valid cognizer. They are false, just like the unclean and so forth that are renowned to be clean and so forth. For the sake of engaging mundane beings, the there is contradiction, even convention.
Okay, so that's clear as mud, isn't it? This is one of the problems with when we start to get to these texts that are really trying to push things. So the first verse is simple. Everything that we've covered in this text up until now, so the first 5 perfections are for the purpose of wisdom. So in other words, it's all to prepare the mind so that it can be, you have the mental power to see things as they are. Yeah? So when you have this dichotomy of wisdom and merit or spiritual energy, and people go, oh, I'm focusing on wisdom, we will never get there if we do that. You need to soften the mind, you need to make the mind ready to do this work. If we think that we can take our stiff head and suddenly apply it to wisdom work, it's not going to happen. You know, we need to open the heart, we need to soften up, we need to move in different ways. But that whole text is leading up to this. So the next line is that there are 2 truths. This is the Madhyamaka Prasangika thing, 2 truths. It's not a Madhyamaka Prasangika thing only. Across the Indian tradition, there's this way of presenting teachings in terms of 2 truths, conventional and the ultimate. What's meant by all the different schools about conventional and ultimate is another thing. And gradually, as you go through the text, we'll see that. I'm not going to say it here. Then the next verse is saying there are 2 kinds of people, ordinary people, and then yogis or meditators. So this stuff comes out of meditation. All these tenet systems, when we did the tenets, they come out of meditating on your own experience and how those things are. What's real in my experience, what is not real, what's true in my experience, what's not true, yeah? It all comes out of there. Later on they become kind of philosophical systems that are written down and argued through and all the rest, but the initial drive is these questions of, we have lots of experiences. Which ones should I trust? Which ones shouldn't I trust? You know, and we all know that we have experiences that we shouldn't trust. Which ones are real and which ones are fictitious? Which ones aren't, you know, real? So these questions drive all of this stuff about tenets and about what is, in my experience, what's real, what's true, you know, what actually exists, how do I exist? All these things, they're all driving these questions. So, and you know, I suppose Buddhists would say that, but amongst them, ordinary people, the views of ordinary people are faulted by the yogis. Damaged we wouldn't use. We'd say we fault what you're. So somebody says this, we say no, that's faulty. It's like we say it's like this. And so, but even within the meditators and the yogis, there are people who say, no, what you're saying is real and what's true has got fault because da-da-da-da, you know. And so you move, and then we go through the 4 schools that you've all, you know, well, most of you have studied. So Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, Madhyamaka, and then within Madhyamaka, the Svatantra own power, and the Prasangika, the consequentialists. So, and they're all. It's not that they all reject everything that the other one did, but they're kind of refining each time, refining what happens. So the first thing is people see entities and conceive them to be real, not like illusions. Therefore, here, yogis and people debate. Now remember, Shantideva is a Madhyamaka Prasangika. So just forgotten the word for it, but the kind of, when we use things like something is like an illusion, these phrases, they're very much to do with the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka schools. This is like an illusion. It's not the same as saying it is an illusion, but it's like an illusion. So the question in your mind is that in what way? That should be the question that you're thinking. People see entities. Entities translates the Sanskrit word bhava, and it's translated in Tibetan as ngo. So sometimes that's translated as functioning thing, particularly in the South Antica school. But there's a more fundamental thing going on. When the Buddhist meditators at the kind of Vaibhashika level were meditating, they noticed there were two kinds of things going on. Something doesn't exist at all, that's over there if you like. Then things that do exist, moments that do exist, remember we're talking about moments flashing into existence. Of these moments, some of them have more reality, if you like, or more substance is the actual term, there, more substance, dravya sat, than others. For example, when we are angry, that moment of anger has some oomph, some substance, some power. Thinking about being angry doesn't have that. Do you see that kind of... So, and this is actually, it's interesting that we don't present this because it's too shocking for most people, because we believe our stories all the time. The stories we tell ourselves, you know, we believe them. And within the yogis, they're basically saying there are two kinds of things that exist. The bhavas, and they're like anger, love, forms, visual forms, feelings of feeling happy or sad, or these things. So the five aggregates, they're all bhavas. They're all these things, but they don't cover everything. You know, lots of thinking about this and that and these and those. They're kind of put outside. Now this is within the Vaibhashika school. Once you get into Sautrantika, they don't make this distinction, but it's quite an interesting distinction that they're making. These bhavas have more reality, if you like. They are real, but they have more reality than the abhavas, the ngo me. Yeah? So all the stories that we tell ourselves are ngo me. So sometimes you see in the Theravada school, when they're doing their meditation practices, that they will still very firmly take, you know, what's real are the moments that you would then put into the five skandhas in terms of your meditation and placing things around, the five aggregates. So visual forms are real, they have substance, and they have a separate substance to our mental substance. Our mind has substance, that the visual forms that appear to it have substance. The audio forms that appear to it have substance. The smells have substance. There's something going on. Substance is probably too technical a word, it's almost like stuff. There's mind stuff, and then there's kind of like form stuff. And this is where they're dividing it up. There's the mental experience, if you like, which is the last four of those aggregates. And then there's the things that appear to it. Yeah? Things that appear to it. You can also have, of course, the mind being aware that it's angry, but anger is still a mental event. Yeah? Whereas the appearance of a blue blob over there is not a mental event. The understanding of the blue blob appearing is. Yeah? So there's this bhavas, things, also there's another translation of that, and then they are, for Vaibhashika school, they have more substance, they're more substantial, they're more real, they're more true than the stories that we tell ourselves. So he immediately starts to cut into these things, and also what we see, our direct perception, what we see for the lower schools is real, isn't it? It's true. We see blue, we see brown, we see, might be white, kind of off-white, you know. That's real. There's what we see, what we hear. These things are real, they are true. And we see them as separate from conceptuality. We have this thing of in Buddhism, that there's something directly experienced, and then there's conceptualization about that that allows us to understand it and deal with it. Yeah? And Madhyamaka Prasangika will very strongly argue that even the perception is actually about conception. You can't pull them out like that in any meaningful sense. You know, you can't say, oh, here is perception and here is conception. It's all in amongst, and it's just the way we're describing reality. Conception is the most important, in the sense that it's ordering what we experience. So, you know, if you think of all of us in this room, we probably have a shared experience of the same, roughly the same colours, although you have to be kind of careful with colours. There's some really wonderful scientific research where, you know, people go off and they ask everybody all around the world, you know, what's this? And they all go blue and they go green and all the rest of it. And then later on, 50 years later, somebody will do the same and it's slightly different. There's a very nice place in Papua New Guinea where somebody took, I think it was blue, red, another colour, to a tribe and said, you know, what are these things, and got their words for it. And said, see, they recognise blue and they recognise red, and we all have this universal understanding and all the rest. And then 50 years later on, somebody went back and showed the same things, but they came from within the tribe, they knew the language. And then they gave the words, and then he said, of course, the trouble is that what they were saying is, that's shiny and that's matte. It was nothing to do with blue or red. It was the surface sheen on the thing that they were noting. And of course he's going, oh, that's red, that's blue. So we have to be a bit careful about universal understanding of anything, actually. But because we all share roughly the same cultural things, we will probably be agreeing that there's orange on the tables, there's blue mats, there's red cushions, this kind of stuff. But we organise the visual field through our conceptual baggage, if you like, don't we? You know, the visual field, if you think about it, you're just being bombarded by colour points, you know. And much of the research seems to show that actually we're not seeing the whole thing, whatever image we're getting, we're not seeing the whole thing in any case, we're kind of filling in a lot of blanks. So we're already pre-processing what we experience passively, you know, that sense of, oh, the outside world comes to me passively. Not like that in Madhyamaka. They say we're actively organising through conceptuality our experience. What drives that, of course, if you look at the classic two Mahayana schools, is our karmic baggage, you know. That's why when you have the Chittamatra school and they talk about 9 consciousnesses, you know, or 8 consciousnesses, you have the 6 consciousnesses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and then the mental consciousness. And then they say there's this thing which is your kind of sense of who you are, your I maker, ahamkara, manaskara, and then there's the storehouse consciousness of all. Some, you know, if you take it as an illusion, as a metaphor for all of our accumulated stuff that drives us unconsciously, then I think it's quite an interesting thing to work with. Because we can all be doing something and then suddenly you just think, where on earth did that come from, you know? Or why have I gotten to this situation again? You know, where logically I know I shouldn't have, but I'm in it again. This is because the storehouse is there. All of our past predispositions are all there. Good, bad, indifferent, everything's stacked in there if you take this model. So this preconditioning that we bring to every moment of our experience is something that we need to be careful of and we need to be aware of, because if we want to change, if we want to go to Buddhahood from where we are, we need to rework that conditioning. We need to change the conditioning mix. We need to stop allowing ourselves to repattern. Because of course what happens is, say I have a tendency to greed, well I do have a tendency to greed, so there's a packet of crisps, you know, it's a 500 gram family share packet of crisps. Yeah, whatever. But by locking onto that and thinking that will make me happy if I eat the whole thing while watching Rubbish Kelly, I just reinforce that groove, don't I? And the next time there's an offer for 2 for 1 with the family share, I'm going to buy both of them. I'm going to probably eat both of them the same night, you know what I mean? It's unhelpful because I'm reinforcing that point, because I'm repeating it, yeah? So in terms of us changing, there are 2 things that we're trying to do. One is about bringing on new patterns of thinking, new patterns of behavior, but the other one is not repeating the old patterns of behavior. So if you look at the 37 practices that are harmonious with enlightenment, and you have the 4 foundations for mindfulness, yeah? We talked about those. The next one, the next set of 4, they're often called the 4 abandonments. Probably better to say the 4 beginning with the abandonment, yeah? Because what it's saying is, we have stuff in our, if you think about where you go with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you look at the body and you look at a variety of things about the body and you become aware of its impermanence and all the rest. Then you look at feelings and you do the same with that. You look at awareness itself, chitta, mind, and you become aware of that. Then you look at mental content, chittasika, which is this 4th one, or dharma, and that's, if you look at the content of your mind, the first thing you will see is that there's a lot in there, and quite a lot of it's not terribly helpful. Some of it could be helpful if it was improved, if it was increased. And so then there's that next 4 is about not repeating the unhelpful ones, repeating the helpful ones. It's not doing things, getting rid of things that are unhelpful, not doing them, bringing on the helpful ones and bringing in new helpful ones, you know. So the idea, we all have a sense of love and kindness, you know, most people have that. Even, I'm sure, mass murderers have that for their rabbit or their friend or something like that. What is new is the idea that we can love everybody equally, unconditionally. You know, that's shocking, I'm afraid. That's outrageous, isn't it? As an idea, that is outrageous that we can love everybody, all living beings, equally, unconditionally. Because a lot of our love is conditional love, isn't it? You know, somebody pisses us off and the love gets drawn back a bit. You know, they get rationed. And similarly with the other big Bodhisattva minds, that wish to remove suffering from everyone, every single person, that's outrageous when you think about it. But we have compassion. We do feel sorry for people, and we do try and help people, and we do commiserate, and we do we do have that sense of wanting to help remove suffering from beings. But when we put it to all beings, that's when it becomes something new that we need to work with. You know, in our meditations it's really clear, isn't it? You know, all beings be free from suffering, apart from, you know, so-and-so who did this to me, or, you know, we even do it with people we never met, you know. May all beings be happy, but not Donald Trump. You know. It's not helpful for us. So this next set, the 4 beginning with abandoning, are about getting rid of the rubbish in our head and bringing on the good, if you like. And if you think, what are the next ones coming up? Then they're about these mental powers that we start to get in terms of our meditation. You know, powers of emanation, all these things we'll look later on. And then you have the 5 forces and the 5 powers, maybe in the wrong order, but one is basically saying you have these 5 things, and you make them strong. And then the next one's saying, and you make them even stronger. And then you go into the 7 mental attitudes or mental states that will really push you towards enlightenment, and then you get to the Eightfold Path. So it's really interesting in terms of the history of Buddhism in the West, but and in the East. In the East, the Eightfold Path was always practiced when you saw reality as it is. So in other words, you'd seen emptiness or selflessness. And then when Christmas Humphreys, I think it was him, he was checking with all the Asian traditions what aspect of Buddhism they could agree on. That tended to be the only one that everyone, yeah, we do that as well. You know, so that's why the Eightfold Path suddenly came forward as a kind of presentational matrix for Buddhism. But traditionally, most Asian Buddhists knew nothing of that because it was specialist knowledge. That was for the monks and things like that. It's fascinating the way things change. It's like, there's a very interesting paper, I've forgotten the author's name, but she looked at what in the sort of 19th century before they met Europeans, the European idea of science and scientific religion and all the rest, what people thought of Buddha, the Buddhas. And most people thought that the Buddha was one in a series of 7 or 24 or 1,000 or 10,000, you know. The idea of the story of the historical Buddha is something that's being kind of taken out of the texts and created. Again, most people didn't think that way. And it's kind of like a Christianization in the sense that we come from a culture where Christ was born, had a life, gave his teachings and died. And so if you look at the 19th century and early 20th century, it's the same thing. We're applying the same template to the Buddha, to the Buddha's life. We're not distorting it, but it was never a viewpoint that in Asia was taken as the way it was. The Buddhas presented a sort of almost eternal truth. They just spoke it, and you had to find it yourself. You know, it wasn't. It's very interesting the way we shift because of our cultural context, because of our cultural matrix. We reinterpret it's an other, which is called Buddhism, but we reinterpret in a way that fits us. Sorry, that's going off completely off topic. But it is the way our minds, our conception, our conceptuality frames even our perceptions. The things we think we're passively receiving. It's not like that in Madhyamaka Buddhism. We're actively, not consciously, but actively framing our experience. And it's being driven by the stuff behind.
Would a contemporary example be research that's being done into confabulation, people having mistaken memories? Because there's some incredible research on people believing that they've been to a fun fair when they were a child, or that they've done this or done that, and it's actually not true at all.
Yeah.
And that must be conception, framing perception.
Completely. I mean, it's like, my parents met when they were in Assam. My mum worked for Burma Oil, which doesn't exist anymore, and my dad was a tea planter. So then they met, and then there were anti-European riots, and they came away from India, and then they went back to Sri Lanka. My dad worked in the tea industry there. And then I was born. So there are various things, Michael did this, Michael did that, and all the rest of it. And you believe it, but what's interesting is that you start to write a story about it. I mean, if I'm honest, I don't really remember anything from my youth at all. Certainly not before 5 or something. My earliest memory as a child is of my yogurt bowl being given to the new Dachshund as its food bowl, and this huge sense of resentment. And that only was dealt with consciously when I was meditating, when I first met Buddhism, when we went on a week's retreat. And this huge resentment came up about the dog, who I dearly loved. And I suddenly saw that and thought, whoa, if I'm packing that away in there, God knows what else is in there, But yeah, but some of these things, it's useful to go back and say, what do I actually know, and what is the family story about me? Particularly, there's things like, because I was slightly older, my sister's 8 years younger than me, so there are things that my sister is supposed to have said, supposed to have started various phrases that I know are not true, but you don't bother changing the story because it's part of the kind of family story in a sense. You know, it just trying to think of words now, but I can't. But from my youth, I'm supposed to have called dogs, you know, the nipples on the dog, on a female dog, minkies. So, oh look, the Dachshund's lying on its back and you rub its minkies to, you know, because it wants to have its tummy rubbed. And then later on I thought, you know, did I actually say that? And then I found that actually minky is a kind of Sinhalese expression for nipples as well. So I think it's probably come through my parents actually, rather than, and there are things, there's still kind of odd words we use in our family, which are not real words, but they're supposed to have been said by my sister when she was young, and I kind of wonder, you know. And she sometimes goes, "Really? Did I say that?" I go, "I don't know."
Mike, it sounds very much more that the Chittamatra mind only and the Madhyamaka very, very close in that respect. The only difference with the mind only is that they actually say that the mind has some substance in itself, but that way of co-creation of reality, very little difference.
Yeah.
Is that would that be true?
I personally think so, and I think that is true. I think if you go through those tenet school systems, the first big shock is when all this substantial external reality, and the Chittamatrans say it's not another substance. That's what they're saying when they say the object and the mind are the same substance, is they're saying you're co-creating, is the word you use. And Madhyamaka don't say no, but what they say is the mind also has no substance either. And so it's like, because they say, you know, just if you have substantial entities outside and then substantial mind experience substantial entities, that's a way. But if you remove the substantial entity, then what is there to talk about substance of the mind? You know. So we learn these things as kind of quite over there because it's a useful way of initially learning them. But when you start to get down, particularly with the Mahayana schools, that I think they're much closer than we think. It's not that they're saying the same thing. I mean, there's a very definite thing that they're saying the mind is not substantial, and they're also saying that conceptuality runs everything, you know. So then this is the argument with the Svatantrika, that Svatantrikas will say that there's something there, but we kind of don't know what it is. And Pasanka is going, no, don't attribute things to your experience that's rapidly changing for a start, that you cannot substantiate. You know, it's possible that there is something there, but other than that, you can't say there's something there and then we all see it in a different way, because you've already gone too far. You know? And that's why you can use both Chittamatra and Madhyamaka in tantric practice, because they're both saying we co-create our existence, and therefore unenlightened existence, in theory, can be flipped into enlightened existence by coming out of subtle mind with, I mean, the theory is really clear in Tantra. The practice is a nightmare, but you know what I mean? The theory is if we co-create existence, then we have the power to change that. Now, we could change it suddenly, but our minds are so weak, you know. It's very interesting. Sorry, anything, go back to this. Too much talk and not enough content. Okay, so just one more thing. The way it's presented, that for the sake of engaging mundane beings, the protector taught entities, in thusness they are not momentary. There is contradiction, even conventionally. So when you get down to, if you think about what's taken as true in some of the Buddhist schools, true means it is as you see it. You know, you don't see something and it turns out to be something else. You know, it is what it is, if you like. It's, you know, it's what's written on the tin, or whatever that phrase is. That's true. And they'll say, well, you know, a moment of anger, that's true. A moment of love, that's true. You know, it has a true existence. And then the Madhyamaka would go, what do you mean? You know, what is this? What's this self-defining thing called a moment of true love? A moment of, you know, it is that's presenting to you, not being framed by your conceptuality. I mean, we've all had these discussions, I'm sure, where we talk about, I don't know, compassion or something. What does compassion mean to all of you? And you go away into a huddle, and then you realise that actually we have the term compassion, but then all of us have different takes on that. And that's the classic argument problem, isn't it? You know, I told them this, and they didn't understand. I was using plain English. Compassion. Everybody knows compassion, you know. But they come from a different. They understand it differently. The word's the same. The understanding from that person is different, and that's why when we get into the debate system and the public discussion about logic, you cannot use svatantra or own propositions that you think are perfectly all right to prove your point to somebody else, because they may not share the same worldview. You can only prove things to them by finding out what they think and maybe pointing out there are some contradictions there. But if you try and impose your view, even though it sounds terribly logical, it will never ever convince, because they're different people. They have a different set of stuff, you know. That's what gets lost in our presentations of logic, is from the Buddhist tradition. The basic division in the logic text is between how do I know what's real and valid for me in terms of my experience, and in that situation, a svatantra reason and own reasoning works, because it's only me talking to myself, you know. If I can throw propositions to myself and throw consequences to myself, but they both work in that situation. Go out of that situation and there's another person. Things that seem completely logically tight to me and my own power, or whatever you want to call that way of reasoning, won't work with someone else unless they share exactly the same set of presuppositions. So that's very unlikely. So then the only real way we can debate is by consequence, by taking what they say and saying, so if we follow that through, then this comes, then this comes. It's very subtle what the Buddhists are saying, and it's also really useful to stop arguments. I may believe, and it may seem really logically tight, but when I'm presenting it to someone else, I need to be aware of the fact that they're coming from a different space. Their experience is different to mine. So if we're talking about any term, we have to work out slowly what we mean by that, and then we can start to talk about it. Okay, sorry, I completely ruined it by gabbling. However, one meditation before we go, please. If I hadn't talked so much and you got later on in the text, you'd have found a verse 25, that says, seeing, hearing and knowing are not what are rejected here. Here, that which is the cause of suffering, the conception of these as truly existent, is that to be averted. Or that's the thing to turn back. That's the thing to turn back. Again, true existence, it is as it appears. That's what we mean. Something's true, you can rely on it, you know, there's no... But Prasangika is saying even these things, even the basic perceptions, have a flaw, and what that flaw is that they seem to present to us as if they're kind of self-given, that it's coming from their own side. In terms of the visual field, it seems like it's presenting to us, it's coming from its side. It does not seem to us that we are actually organising this thing conceptually.
This prasangika.
Yeah. And that is our problem, because we, well, I saw it, it's true, I heard it, it's true. But we're framing it all the time. So this is the thing, just a little bit to think about that. Seeing, hearing and knowing are not what is rejected here. So we're not nihilists in this sense. There are things that you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and you think about. But we add something else. And it's not, if you're going to call it conception, it's too gross a term in a sense. They seem to come at us. They seem to present, self-present. They seem to be coming from their own side to us. All the moments of these 5 bodily senses seem to be coming at us, and we're the passive recipient. But the reality is not like that. And so it's that to play with. That's your homework for tonight. Go home and play with that. Show it to your partner, seeing, hearing, but think about it, because this is the prasanga critique of the lower schools. Yes, you can say that there are bhavas and abhavas, and bhavas have more substance, possibly. But have you looked at your bhavas? So those bhavas that are external, the Chittamachans go, sweetheart, they're not external, presenting at you, You're actively involved in your experience, in creating, co-creating in your experience. And Madhyamaka say exactly the same. But they say, because those are part of the same kind of mix and are not separate, out there, shouting at you, calling at you, it doesn't mean that your mind, your subjective experience, is any more real or true than that. Doesn't mean that everything's false either. It means that we're throwing out in everything we do, to use Lama Zopa's terms, hallucination, to use Lama Yeshe's terms, superstition. We superimpose on all of our experiences these essences that just aren't there when we look. And because we do the essence game, we get into so much trouble, really. Okay, so just briefly thinking about that, what is this conception of true existence in terms of just the 5 senses, but what we hear, what we see, what we experience in that way? See if you can get a feel for that sense of putting something out there that simply isn't there. Thank you. Okay, so let's finish with Tara prayers, and then please go home and enjoy your evening. page 28 in the prayer book. 我接受嘛，巴玛多玛拉查塞罗，查塞多玛牛玛巴摩，千尼克吉罗达达玛，吉丹村根去克夏吉，克萨加瓦勒尼朱玛，查塞图给多瓦肯图，卡瓦加尼塞贝夏玛，卡玛托塔索巴兰吉，拉杜切维阿拉巴玛，查塞塞内去尼基基，贝梅乔尼南布拉吉玛。 Jimba Soto Kato Shiwa, Zoba Sanden Joyo Nima, Chase Deji Shepe Soto, Taye Namara Gawa Chema, Malo Paro Jimba Tope, Gawe Seki Shinto Tema, Chase Tutara Muyi, Doda Choda Nakaga, Chiden Domo Jageniente, Luba Meba Goba Numa, Chase Gaji Mela Samba, Lola Naso Wanjojo. Jumbo Rola Disananda, Najin Zagi Tune Tema, Chase Chashi Chada Piki, Palo Tokola Dojo, Yegan Yoga Jagi Niente, Meba Tupa Shintubama, Chase Tule Chiba Chambu, Digi Po Nambarajo, Chigi Shayen Dayen Danzi, Dawo Tanche Malo Zoma, Chase Concho Sansan Chagi, Somo Tuka Nambagiem. Malo Jogi Gola Gembe, Rangi Lungi Sona Tuoma, Chase Natu Kawaji Be, Again Agi Dewa Bel, Sheba Rashi Tutara Yi, Dudanji De Wando Zema, Chase Sashi Kongwe Zon, Tanji Goba Nyama Nima, Daye Yui Yige Wongi, Bomba Tashi Namba Dema, Chase Dawe Dumbo Oye, Yama Tashi Shintubama. Repetele epamele, tabla shindu la sema, chaze kapeta mementa, pawe tiwe elanem, yega yega gane goge, dayi puni nabla joma, chaze saji la chagi, dagi lo jinjagi dum, dayi chenzi yige wogi, reba dumbo nani gema, chaze tema gema shima, nyanin de jinjo yonim, Sawa da yana debe, deba chambo chumba nima, chase kule kola ka, tayi ludi nabla gema, yige chebe nami kebe, leba hone doma nim, chase tore jani daibe, onge naba saba nima, rida manda rada biji, jiden sada yuwa nima, chase layi tsoyi nabe, rida tajen chana nam, Dara Niju Bigi, Duna Manu Bani Sama, Chaza Laye Tsana Yapo, Lada Mia Chietem, Gune Gocha Gawa Jigi, Soda Mirana Basam, Chaza Nyuma Dawa Gebe, Cheni Pala Arasam, Mara Niju Dudara Yi, Shindu Dabo Lime Sama, Chaza Tene Selen Gebe, Shiwe Tada Yanda Dem, Yana Rola no Jinzo na Jomba Dure Rajo Nim, Sawe Nagi Durba Dida, Chaza Wani Nishuza. And the dedications in English. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhisattva that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. You who uphold the Sugyura's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, protector of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Thank you so much for giving up your Saturday, coming here. It's quite windy outside now, so don't get blown over. Who is coming tomorrow but doesn't have the handout for? Okay.
collecting for Steph as well. She's asked me to collect for Steph.
Okay, right, so I'll do a couple more print cards. Right. Luckily,
Friday as well. I didn't pick one up from her for Friday yesterday.
okay, I'll
I just
print
write
them
them
off.
down, shall I? Just write the person.
No, I'll print them off
Oh,
now because there's time before push starts, so I'll do that. Yeah, and I'll put them on your desk.
okay, yeah. She's doing Lumnes, as she's saying.
Hmm?
She's doing Lumnes with Charles.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. So he's back up and running now,
Yeah,
isn't Charles? So that's
started
good.
in November, so I've
Oh,
got a
good.
text. You have to start on Lumnes.
Thank you, mate.
All right. Cheers. See you. Yeah. So is she going to do the Nimnes here in May?
Yeah, she,
Oh, good.
yeah.
Good.
I've got a date.
Yeah.
I'm just saying to Angela. 3 of us. Yeah.
You're all doing it. Excellent. Good. Good.
Can we leave our stuff on?
Hmm?
We can leave our stuff on.
Yeah. Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously not any valuables because thieving Buddhists. Yeah.
Are we doing Lumnes in Sakadara here then?
Where it's not Sakadara actually. I don't think it's the, but it's the first week of May.
Oh, that's true. Sakadara is in June.
The Sakadara is much later this time.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's something like the 17th of June.
Yeah. But no, it's one of these things when you're dozy and you try and put something in, you think, oh, 6 months will be enough. It's not in our calendar. You're welcome. You have to kind of put everything in a year ahead, which of course Margaret then has to exercise immense patience with me when she's trying to rent these rooms out and she's going, do you really need it? I don't know. So, but it'll be a 2-day Nyingme. And the idea is that if Geshe Namdak agrees, then we'll start a Discovering Buddhism course. So the practice components of that, the module 14 components are 35 Confession Buddhas, Bodhisattva, Nyingmes. And so if we start people on those early, then they have more of a chance of doing 100,000 of them by the time 3 years is finished.
It'll be interesting how we market that, because someone said to me, new Geshe coming in, all he's going to do is teach Discovering Buddhism, which was taught by, us lot before, which is really interesting angle to hear from someone.
No, I mean, he wants to teach Lamrem, he wants to teach Discovering Buddhism, but he also, there has to be something for the older,
But
the people who
our
think they know.
challenge is how we present it, so
Yes,
it doesn't look like
exactly.
we've suddenly got Geshe to teach what we can teach ourselves.
Yeah. Well, yes, but many of them can't. That's the trouble.
Well, no, of course.
They're not actually allowed to, in one sense.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
It's just that you can see.
No, we have to do that, and that's why we have Jamyang, and she'll do the marketing. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's we just have to see what he is. I mean, until he comes, we can't see how people are going to react with him. That's the thing.
Or how we got to run the classes.
Yeah. I mean, from the emails, he seems a really sweet, lovely person.
Everybody I've spoken to who's met him.
Yeah. He's lovely. Very good heart.
Maybe he'll do some days.
He might well do, I mean, once he